All right, so we have got behavior therapy today, chapter 5, like I said, in the behavior change specialist manual. I do have kind of early on, I've actually got a video to show you right out the gate today that's going to sort of act as an introduction. It is also a crash. It's so funny we got to show that crash course video last night, but this is another video on the same thing. This is also a crash course video, but it is a behavior therapy crash course video. So this is from Crash Course Psychology instead of I think it was Crash Course Business Skills yesterday. Where is it? Is it that one? It's not that one, is it? Psychotherapy is not the one we're looking at. How to Train a Brain, that's the one. I was like, that's definitely not the right picture. Okay, here we go. Oh, I need to share the sound. Hold on. And skip that on. Let's unmute this guy. All right, let's talk a little bit about Pavlov, shall we? This is kind of a fun little story here.
So the name Ivan Pavlov rings a bell. It's because his experiments are among the most famous in the history of psychology. His work contributed to the foundation of the behaviorist school of thought that viewed psychology as an empirically rigorous science focused on observable behaviors and not unobservable internal mental processes. Even though today we view psychology as the science of both behavior and mental processes, Pavlov's influence was tremendous. His research helped pave the path for more experimental rigor in behavioral research right up to the present day. Born in 1849 in Russia, Pavlov was never much for psychology. After giving up on his original aspirations to become a Russian Orthodox priest like his father, he instead earned a medical degree and spent nearly 20 years studying the digestive system, earning Russia's first Nobel Prize in his mid-50s for his research expanding our understanding of how stomachs worked. He didn't study human stomachs, though, because the procedures were terrible and cruel. He studied dog stomachs, and while researching those dogs, he noticed how the animals would salivate at a mere whiff of their dinner. At first, he found all that slobber annoying, but soon started to suspect that this behavior was actually a simple but important form of learning. For us scholars of psychology, we can define learning as the process of acquiring, through experience, new and relatively enduring information or behaviors. Whether through association, observation, or just plain thinking, learning is what allows us to adapt to our environments and to survive. And as Pavlov began to discover, it wasn't only humans who learned. Soon enough, he was turning out his famous series of experiments in which he paired the presence of meat powder, yummy, which got the dogs to drooling, with lots of different neutral stimuli, things that wouldn't normally make you drool, like a certain sound or shining a light or a touch on the leg. Then Pavlov observed after several of these pairings, a dog would start to drool just at the sound or the light or the touch, even if there wasn't any slobber-inducing meat powder around. Animals, he found, can exhibit associative learning. That's when a subject links certain events, behaviors, or stimuli together in the process of conditioning. This may be the most elemental, basic form of learning a brain can do, but that doesn't mean that the processes behind conditioning are or ever were obvious, or for that matter, simple. In fact, the research that's gone into how we're conditioned by our environments has helped shape the science of psychology from a still kind of subjective thought exercise into the more rigorous discipline we know today. And it starred some of psychology's most notable and often controversial figures, including Pavlov, B.F. Skinner, and that guy who trained kids to be terrified of furry animals. Okay, I'm not a licensed dog trainer. Do they license dog trainers? But I can break down for you the sequence of steps in Pavlov's famous experiment to help you get a sense of how conditioning works. First, before conditioning, the dog just drools when it smells food. That smell is the unconditioned stimulus, and the slobbering, the unconditioned or natural response. The ringing sound, which at this point means nothing to the dog, is the neutral stimulus, and it produces no drooling. During conditioning, the unconditioned stimulus, the food smell, is paired with the neutral stimulus, the bell sound and results in drooling. This is repeated many times until the association between the two stimuli is made in a stage called acquisition. By the time you get to the after conditioning phase, that old neutral stimulus has become a conditioned stimulus, because it now elicits the conditioned response of drooling. Sounds super simple, right? If you have a dog, you've probably seen it tap dance at the sight of a leash, but in Pavlov's day, this whole series of steps hadn't really been studied in a lab setting or even thought about in scientific terms. Pavlov's work suggested that classical conditioning, as this kind of learning came to be known, could be an adaptive form of learning that helps an animal survive by changing its behavior to better suit its environment. In this case, a bell means food, and food means survival, so get ready. Not only that, but methodologically, classical conditioning shows how a process like learning can actually be studied through direct observation of behavior in real time without all those messy feelings and emotions. This is something Pavlov especially appreciated given his disdain for mentalistic concepts like consciousness and introspection championed by Freud. Behaviorist psychologists like Pavlov's younger American analogs B.F. Skinner and John B. Watson also embraced the notion that psychology was all about objective, observable behavior. In his 1930 book Behaviorism, he argued that given a dozen healthy infants, he could train any one of them to be a doctor, artist, lawyer, or even a thief, regardless of their talents, tendencies, or ancestry. Whoa there, Watson! Thankfully, no one gave him any infants. In his most famous, and yes, controversial experiment, Watson conditioned a young child dubbed Little Albert to fear a white rat. Maybe that doesn't sound so bad, but he accomplished this by pairing the rat with a loud, scary noise over and over, and then demonstrated that the terror could branch out and be generalized to include other furry white objects like bunnies, dogs, or even fur coats. So yeah, that would not fly today, obviously, but Watson's research did make other psychologists wonder whether adults, too, were just holding tanks of conditioned emotions, and if so, whether new conditioning could be used to undo old conditioning. Like, if you're terrified of roller coasters, but you made yourself ride one 10 times a day for 2 weeks, would your fears fade? For the record, recent exploration has revealed that the boy known as Little Albert sadly died a few years after these experiments, while Watson eventually left academia and got into advertising, where he put all that associative learning to lucrative use. So that's classical conditioning, but we've also got another kind of associative learning, operant conditioning. If classical conditioning is all about forming associations between stimuli, operant conditioning involves associating our own behavior with consequences. The kid who gets a cookie for saying please, or the aquarium seal that gets a sardine for balancing a ball on its nose, they've both been trained with operant conditioning. The basic premise here is that behaviors increase when followed by reinforcement or reward, but they decrease when followed by punishment. And the most well-known champion of operant conditioning is American behaviorist B.F. Skinner. He designed the famous operant chamber, or Skinner box, a confined space containing a lever or button that an animal could touch to get some kind of reward, typically food, along with a device that keeps track of its responses. Okay, time for a debunking break. Other than maybe Freud, no other figure in psychology seems to be as shrouded in lore and misinformation as B.F. Skinner. So I'm just gonna tell you straight that no, Skinner never put any kids in the box, and no, he didn't raise his children without love or affection, and his daughter didn't hate his guts until the day she committed suicide. Deborah Skinner is alive and well, and she loved her dad plenty. Skinner did, however, invent something called an air crib, a climate-controlled box with a window on the front that was meant to keep babies warm and safe while their moms ran around doing their 1950s lady thing. It's not exactly where I'd like to spend the night, but it wasn't remotely the same as the Skinner box. No one knows where all these myths came from, but being a somewhat controversial guy, Skinner had a lot of haters, some of whom were probably happy to perpetuate misinformation. But back to the rat in the box. Basically, the box provided an observable stage to demonstrate Skinner's concept of reinforcement, which is anything that increases the behavior that it follows. In other words, you push the lever, you get a snack, and then you want to keep pushing the lever. But most rats aren't gonna push a lever for no reason. I mean, there aren't food dispensing levers in the natural environment, so operant conditioning behavior requires shaping. Maybe you give the rat a little nibble of food each time it gets closer to the bar, then only when it touches the bar, until little by little, in a series of successive approximations to the desired behavior, you reward them only when they do the thing you're trying to shape them to do. In everyday life, we're all continually reinforcing, shaping, and refining each other's behaviors, both intentionally and accidentally. We do this with both positive and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement obviously strengthens responses by giving rewards after a desired event, like the rat snack after the lever push, or getting a cookie when you say please. Negative reinforcement is a little trickier. It's what increases a behavior by taking away an aversive or upsetting stimulus, like say get in your car and it does that infernal beeping thing until you fasten your seatbelt. The car is reinforcing your seatbelt wearing by getting rid of that horrible beeping, and it's good. You should wear your seatbelt. It's important to recognize here that negative reinforcement is not the same as punishment. Punishment decreases a behavior either positively by, say, getting a speeding ticket, or negatively by taking away a driver's license. But negative reinforcement removes the punishing event to increase the behavior. So painkillers negatively reinforce the behavior of swallowing them by ending the headache. So by now, hopefully you're getting the picture. There are things that we want and things that we don't want, and we can be taught by way of those impulses to behave certain ways. But it's worth pointing out that conditioning is way more complex than just the cookie in the beeping car. For one thing, ending annoyance or getting a cookie are types of primary reinforcers. You don't have to learn that. They just make innate biological sense. Beeping is annoying, cookies are delicious. But there are other kinds of reinforcers that we only recognize after we learn to associate them with primary reinforcers. Like a paycheck is a conditioned reinforcer. We want money because we need food and shelter, which are still the primary drivers. Plus, just as there are different kinds of reinforcers, so are there various reinforcement schedules. Like those boxed rats were getting continuous reinforcement when they got a treat every single time they hit the lever, so they picked it up pretty quickly. But if one day the rat chow doesn't come, that connection quickly dwindles and the rat stops hitting the lever. This is a process called extinction, and it is important because that's how real life works. Outside of a Skinner box, you're not gonna get continuous reinforcement. All of life is a series of partial or intermittent reinforcements that only occur sometimes. Learning under these conditions takes longer, but it holds up better in the long run and is less susceptible to that extinction. So say a cafe gives out a free cup of coffee for every 10 you buy, while another shop pours a free double shot every Tuesday morning, and yet another has a free coffee lottery that customers win at random. These are all different kinds of intermittent reinforcement techniques that get customers coming back for more. Now, Pavlov, Watson, and Skinner's ideas were definitely controversial, as well as the whole scary rat experiment. Plenty of folks disagreed with their insistence that only external influences and not internal thoughts and feelings shaped behavior. It was clear to many of the behaviorists' rivals that our cognitive processes, our thoughts, perceptions, feelings, memories, also influence the way we learn. We're going to talk about how these other things factor into learning next week when we look more at conditioning, cognition, and observational learning. And yeah, also watch kids beat the face off blow-up dolls. Today, though, you learned how associative learning works, the essentials of behaviorist theory, the basic components of classical and operant conditioning, including positive and negative reinforcement and reinforcement scheduling. Thanks for watching this, especially to all of our Subbable subscribers who make this whole channel possible. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of Crash Course, or get a special laptop decal, or even be animated into an upcoming episode, just go to Subbable.com. This episode was written by Kathleen Yale, edited by Blake DiPastino, and our consultant is Dr. Ranjit Bhagwat. Our director and editor is Nicholas Jenkins, the script supervisor is Michael Ronda, who is also our sound designer, and the graphics team is Thought Cafe.
Okay. So that is a little bit of the difference here. So it's kind of funny, he mentioned really briefly how, like, Skinner was a pretty, like, controversial guy, Watson is a pretty controversial guy. I mean, Skinner had, like, a lot of people that, like, really disliked him because, like, he was a behaviorist, and behavioral therapy kind of came out of it was like the second realm of psychology. Like, psychology as like a study really kind of started with, like, Sigmund Freud, and, like, at this point we know that, like, pretty much everything that Sigmund Freud figured out is just not really true. Like, you know, like, it's funny, we still see, like, Freudian analysis in, like, movies and TV and stuff, but pretty much any therapist out there doesn't use that technique anymore. Freud was like, he was all about what is called psychotherapy, which is basically where you lay on a couch and dredge up as many memories as possible from your childhood, because Freud believed that, like, anything you were exposed to as, like, a child is directly related to, like, how you behave nowadays, and you're not really in control of, like, your thoughts are really in control of you. And we know that that's not really true. Like if that were the case, changing habits would pretty much be impossible. And so behaviorists kind of came along afterwards and were like, hey, like we think that like your behaviors are actually sort of what affect your personality more than just what you were born with. And that was a really controversial thought at the time. And what's funny is therapy is and psychology are actually in kind of a revolution right now and have been over the last few years. And it's changing more into like our thoughts. And so we're starting to focus a little bit more on what we're going to talk about tomorrow, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very similar to the behavior therapy stuff, but focuses a little bit more on thoughts and emotions, which is why, like, we're going to talk about that tomorrow. So it's a pretty fascinating thing in the realm of psychology. Like it really has changed a lot over the years. But yeah, that's sort of where we're headed today. Simon, do you have a question?
Yeah, this video. Do you watch The Office?
Oh yeah.
So this crash course video reminded me of the episode where Jim pulls a prank on Dwight about the treats.
Yes.
Like the alarm will go off and Dwight was already automatically sticking his hand out.
Oh yeah. So I will be pulling that video up in about 20 minutes. Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the clips that I like to show in this class, actually.
Yeah, that's mine went to automatically when it was talking about the dog and the bell.
Yep, exactly. But that is how we train. That's how we train our dogs. That's how we train ourselves, actually. You just need to be able to kind of recognize, like the point he makes at the end. And honestly, I think that he makes that point at the very end of the video much better than this chapter does. But one of the problems, with classical conditioning that we sort of don't realize on the surface is that a lot of times we have intermittent conditioning in the real world, like things aren't always perfect. You know what I mean? Like, you don't get a very clear stimulus all the time. And that's why sometimes it is really hard to create our habits, right? Like if you were, like, honestly, if you're trying to create like a workout schedule and go to the gym regularly, the best way to do it is to never miss a session, go at the exact same time all the time. But like, if you have like a dentist appointment that gets in the way, or like the gym is closed for repairs one day, it starts to mess up how we form our habits. And so we experience intermittent conditioning, which does sort of take a little bit longer. And then those habits can start to fade very, very easily, which is where, around the holidays, everybody really struggles. And then freaking New Year's, the gym explodes. And, all of us that are like kind of regulars are like, oh God, all these people, get out of here, and it's because we kind of get used to having the gym be empty if you're really dedicated, because everybody's like busy, they're traveling for the holidays, they're doing this, they're doing that, right? And then it gets busy again, like we're in New Year's, and so it does kind of interrupt our habits, can be sort of interrupted pretty easily, actually. It also reminds me of like, it's funny. I think that prank that Jim does in the office that we're gonna watch later is actually very similar to another one of the pranks, which is like, I think it's actually in the episode where Jim decides to like move to the other office, but he talks about how like one of the complaints that Jim put in the complaint box is where he was like, I smacked my head with the phone. And Jim talks about how like what he did is he unscrewed the phone and he put like one extra nickel in there every single day, and then like one day just removed all the nickels. So he goes, wait, bringing the phone to his ear. That is very similar to classical conditioning as well. You get used to one version of something over time, and then if it changes, like, you do kind of experience sort of a big difference there. So that is behavior therapy. We're going to be kind of going through this, but yeah, so it did kind of start with psychoanalysis or Freudian therapy. Me personally, I don't put really any stock into Sigmund Freud's work at this point anymore. We can be thankful to the guy for the fact that like therapists exist because of him. He kind of professionalized the entire industry, but he's pretty much wrong about everything. He was kind of sexist, like kind of not my favorite dude in the world. But he was all about like, early childhood development and recreating like specific things so that you can kind of come to term with those things, experienced something that was maybe traumatic in your childhood and re-exposing yourself to it to see that it's maybe not so scary or that you can, kind of move past that. I think there's definitely way better ways to do that rather than sitting on a couch for 50 hours and, finally like figuring out what the thing is. That's the thing about Freudian therapy that's like kind of more controversial nowadays, is the fact that it just freaking takes forever. It's a very slow process of hours upon hours. If you've ever seen the movie, oh God, what is that movie called? With the mob boss. Oh, it's a mob boss therapist movie. The Billy Crystal. Analyze this. If you've ever seen that mafia movie, it's like with this like mob boss who like gets a therapist, and he's on a couch for hours and hours, and it's kind of the classic sort of movie therapist that we see. So instead of focusing on that, we are going to focus on behavior therapy, which makes sense considering that, like, as behavior change specialists, we are trying to help people create new habits. So this is the application of principles derived from scientific research that theorizes about learning to problems in living. That definition doesn't really help me out a lot when I like read that. I'm like, I guess I can understand that sentence, but me personally, I'm like, look, we are understanding individuals' behaviors from the perspective of learned habits. That's what we're really looking at here, right? Like, we can understand our behaviors by understanding the fact that it's like, oh, I behave this way because I was conditioned this way slowly over my life. And so, me, for instance, right? Like this is part of the reason, like, and some of this is biological, by the way. Like, some people tend to be more like runners when it comes to exercise. Other people tend to be more like weightlifters when it comes to exercise. Chances are the reason you're that way is because like your body biologically releases probably like endorphins and really positive hormones and things that make you feel good when you do those things, right? Like, I was pretty much an only child growing up. And my brother was like 11 years older than me, lived with his mom, so I kind of grew up in like an only child situation. So playing sports and things like that was kind of a new experience to me that I got into when I was like a little older, because like I always had like someone to play with. There's always like a neighbor or something, but then like being on like a team was like a really exciting thing for me. So I really got into sports when I was like, and really enjoyed that like community aspect. And so that sort of like reinforced these like really positive feelings that I had, and that kind of like shaped the types of things that I like. And so the sports that I happened to get into were all very cardio based. So for me, I have like a very positive association, very positive viewpoint, and like my habits are very continually reinforced when it comes to activities that are more related to like running and cardio. Whereas someone else might have like, really early exposure to lifting weights or fun things like that, and maybe their body like biologically is just a little bit more anaerobic in their metabolic rate. Like, they have a predisposition for type 2 muscles, so they really enjoy like weightlifting and stuff, which is why like it's so funny. Like my friend Josh, who is also very much like a runner, he would much rather run 5 miles than do 10 push-ups. like push-ups are his least favorite thing in the world, whereas like other people absolutely love it and they can't stand doing cardio. We can analyze that from like a behavior standpoint, right? It's like, oh well, chances are like you have a positive association with one thing and a negative association with the other. How do we turn that thing that you have a negative association with into something positive, right? If you don't like eating like certain types of vegetables, hey, why don't we see if we can create like a positive association with that veggie, right? Let's find a different way to kind of get it into our diet and stuff. So NASM is going to break this down into sort of 3 steps where they're looking at behavior therapy. This is sort of the original 3 steps, how they're laid out. Personally, I think that these words don't stick in the brain quite as well because they're not words that we normally use, and I don't think that they're very descriptive of what they do. But the three sort of steps to a behavior, it starts with what's called the antecedent, right? And this is basically an initial event that's going to trigger some type of behavior down the line, but it's an initial event or experience, right? It's like you can think of it as a trigger, right? When people say that they're like, oh, that trigger, it's like a thing that like kind of jumps out at them, right? That's the antecedent, right? And then let's say like you have a hard day at work, for instance, that could be your trigger. That could be something that kind of sets you off to seek some type of like comfort, like me, if I get really stressed out, if I just have like a really hard day, I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna relax, I'll play some video games and just kind of blow off some steam, right? Other people, it might be like they're gonna go home, they're gonna do some meditation. Other people might do a little bit of yoga. Somebody else might go for a jog. Somebody else might go lift some weights. Somebody else might go for a walk. Somebody might call their mom. Somebody might take a drink of coffee. Like there's a lot of things that we can do that are sort of triggered by sort of stress and initial events, and we definitely live in a world that is packed full of stress. So understanding your antecedents, understanding your triggers is one of the key aspects of creating effective behavior change. The next thing is all the stuff that's like sort of associated with that antecedent, right? And we call that the organismic reaction. I like to call it the behavior, right? So what happens after you experience something that sort of like triggers you, right? That's where you get like your behavior. Again, like you're going to seek, this person who had like a really hard day at work is going to seek some type of comfort. That comfort might come in the form of like junk food, like potato chips, or like my roommate, my roommate's go-to is like if he had a really like stressful day, he'll come home like late at night, and he'll have like a stressful meeting or something. He's already had dinner, but he'll come in and he'll he'll like make like a bowl of cereal, like that's like his like sugary cereal, that's like his favorite like late night snack if he's had like a hard day. And then lastly, we've got sort of the consequence, which is sort of the outcome of that behavior, right? So like when you engage in cereal, you're bringing in extra calories. If you don't really struggle with your weight, then hey, that's fine, but sometimes that consequence can sort of pull us away from something that we're working towards, right? So this person who is had a hard day at work, is seeking some junk food, might be consuming some high energy foods, very high in calories, that are sort of pulling them away from their goal. That can lead to like even more stress, and this can be sort of a vicious cycle sometimes. So they're using antecedent, organismic, and consequence, which is really funny because like NASM actually brings this material back in your nutrition materials, like the nutrition coaching stuff. You guys will see this again, but they lay it out in such a better way that actually becomes a little easier to memorize, which is like they still use the word antecedent, but then they use behavior and then consequence. So it's like the ABCs of our actions, right? We experience the antecedent, it causes some type of like emotion or association to come up, then we go through our behavior, and then our behaviors have some type of consequence, right? I think I mentioned to you guys that like I sometimes get a little like zoned out if I'm shopping too long. I just don't like shopping. And so like after a while, my brain gets a little decision fatigued, right? And so like when that happens, my behaviors are that I'll just like spend money to get the situation over with. And then the consequence of that is that I spent way too much money, like that's the thing. We can also use this to our advantage, right? Consequences don't have to be negative, they're also very positive, right? Sometimes like the antecedent, let's say you set your alarm off, you get used to going to the gym like every day, right? The antecedent is like your alarm going off at, let's say, like 5:30 a.m. or something. You roll out of bed, and at first you're like, oh, this sucks, I'm so tired and frustrated and stuff, but then slowly you remember it's like, oh, I'm gonna go see my gym partner soon. For me, I used to have like an iced coffee in the morning, which always kind of woke me up because it was really cold, and like I kind of cold brew coffee is just so caffeinated. And so I always look forward to that every morning. And so I started drawing like a positive association with things. And then like, it's exciting to get to go see your gym partner, like and working out. If you enjoy it, it's a great positive experience. So, that behavior of like rolling out of bed, starting your morning and getting to the gym has consequences of like, you being in really good shape and starting your day in a very consistent way. So, consequences are not always negative for sure, but that is sort of how we can use classical conditioning to sort of hack our habits. This is where I did mention one of my favorite books is The Power of Habit. It's by this guy, Charles Duhigg. This book right here is all about this sort of 3-step process. In fact, if I pull up an image here, you can see he's sort of using the hamster wheel or the rat on a wheel as sort of an example here, and then the book is full of little pictures like this where it talks about this is sort of the initial thing. He retools it in his own language. He calls it a cue instead of an antecedent or a trigger. He calls it a routine instead of a behavior, and he calls it a reward instead of a consequence. But that's sort of the 3-step process, right? We experience some type of cue, then we seek out relief, and then we have the reward from, in that version, the behavior, the routine, the relief, right? But if instead, if you have like let's say like somebody who drinks a lot of alcohol, their cue is that whenever they experience stress or, anxiety or anything like that, they seek out comfort in alcohol. The reward is that like the fear and anxiety stuff goes away. So now they're like, oh, alcohol solves all my problems. And so then it kind of starts to become this habit loop, and that can lead to like addiction and, things like that. But there's obviously like, if you want to interrupt that cue, I mean, like look at Alcoholics Anonymous. They've done some amazing things to help millions of people over the years. And so now they experience like, the same cue of like stress or something like that, but then they can go, seek out like their sponsor or someone else and like talk about their things. And that can lead to the same type of relief without that alcohol. And so the reward is like they feel better, but they didn't have to engage in this thing that is, objectively very, very bad for us. So that is a very simple breakdown of that book. I love that book. If you ever get a chance to read it, I think it is not only very fascinating, it is also like really fun. It's got so many really cool stories, and I'll be bringing a couple of them up as we go through today. So classical conditioning is sort of the original version of behavior therapy. This is sort of where this started. The ring a bell, the Pavlov, right? You got the dog, he smells the meat powder, he starts to salivate, right? That's sort of the original version. But then he starts to ring a bell every time he's going to give that dog the meat powder, and then the dog like starts to associate the bell with getting fed. So then when he hears the bell, he starts to salivate, right? That is known as classical conditioning, right? And it's learning through associations between both like unconditioned and conditioned stimuli, right? So an unconditioned stimuli is unconditionally sort of naturally occurring, and that triggers usually like an unconditioned response, right? This is sort of like where you're moving through the world, you don't really have any control over what you're going to be exposed to, and guess what, you also haven't really trained yourself to really have any control of your response to all this stuff, right? That's an unconditioned stimulus that triggers an unconditioned response, right? So unconditioned stimuli often result in these automatic things, right? Like if you smell your favorite food because you're just walking down the street, you're going to start salivating in response. I had a teacher explain this to me, and I always thought this was the best analogy ever. It's like a cartoon character walking down the street, and then you know how like the pie, there's drawn in cartoons, like the pie smell is like going down the street, and then all of a sudden they lift off the ground and they're just like floating towards the pie. Like that's sort of an unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response, right? Now, a conditioned stimulus is where this is often associated with an unconditioned A conditioned stimuli, there we go, is often associated with an unconditioned stimulus that triggers a conditioned response. So, this is where, like, let's say you're starting to like train yourself, and it's like, nope, every time I smell that freaking pie, I'm gonna cross the street, or an alarm goes off at the exact same time every single day. You slowly start to associate that with getting out of bed. For me, one of the things that like was really helpful, and this is actually known as pre-macking as well. We'll talk about that later. But when I was really trying to get a little bit better at like rolling out of bed and staying out of bed, thank goodness, the smartphones are amazing. They have done some not so great things for us over the world, as when it comes to like posture and habits, they're very addictive. Because of all the stuff that we're talking about right now, actually. But one thing that was really helpful is like they became our alarm clocks, and I remember like always struggling to like, I would hit my alarm clock and turn it off, and I'd roll back over and go back to sleep, and then I'd be late for school or whatever. I had that really bad habit for years and years and years, but eventually I started using my phone as my alarm clock, and I would just put it in my bathroom, and then I would put my toothbrush on top of the phone. And that little change meant that like as soon as I picked up my phone, I already had my toothbrush in hand, and I would just start brushing my teeth. I had no real temptation to roll back over into bed. Just make sure you have a toothbrush cover because your phone is full of germs. So that is sort of what we call a conditioned response. It's learning through repeated exposure to some type of conditioned stimulus, right? So you continually expose yourself to this, and it sort of happens slowly over time. And this is where like our habits kind of come from sometimes, right? We have these conditioned responses to things, your phone rings, you're naturally inclined to answer it. But if it's a telemarketer, right, and it happens too often, eventually you're going to be like, I'm just not going to answer my phone whenever I don't recognize a phone, a number, right? And that can be fine unless like, it's your bank calling to tell you that like, someone has stolen your credit card. Now you missed that call, things can be bad, right? So this is sort of where operant conditioning comes in, right? This is where we start to talk about like, okay, so classical conditioning is the understanding of how we naturally respond to things, and associations kind of get drawn over time. It's sort of just what happens in a natural world. You go out living your life, you're going to experience classical conditioning. But let's say you want to start changing your habits, right? Let's say we look at the power of habit, thing, and instead of like, naturally seeking out like alcohol or drugs or whatever, right? Now we start to seek out like comfort in other ways. We're starting to change our habits. That process of changing habits and learning associations or making your associations or choosing voluntary behaviors is what we call operant conditioning, right? So operant conditioning involves learning that occurs by making associations between voluntary behaviors and their associations, right? So we as the coach, we can work with our clients to identify some target behaviors, and we can use operant conditioning in order to increase those target behaviors, right? By drawing some type of an association with those behaviors and with their consequences. So I mean by that is like, if we want someone to learn to associate like a certain time of day with going to the gym, whenever that time of day rolls around, they're naturally and instinctively going to want to get out the door and head to the gym, right? That is sort of how we can use operant conditioning, right? This is why like we want our clients to like have a positive, very fun time when they're exercising. And it's why like I know I talk about it all the time, but like it's important to warm up and cool down, because that can be a really good time for you as the trainer to check in with your client. That can be a really good time to like have like, the time to give your client's brain to focus on the fact that like they feel really good after the workout, right? you guys will remember I taught you a little bit of, well, some of you will remember I taught you a little bit of Pnf stretching. And then Mo probably did this a little bit with you guys because I know that's totally his thing. But if you've ever done like a little bit of Pnf stretching, it feels great when you're done with it. You know, you feel a little bit more bendy and flexible. You're like, oh my God, all my aches and pains are gone. You know, that is how I love to end all of my sessions with my clients. I'll just take them through and do like 3 or 4 stretches at the very end and then send them out the door. It's a really great way to end the session. So then they start to associate this really positive feeling that they have leaving the gym with all of the hard work that they do inside the gym. Right. And that's one way that we do this, right? Or a high five after a really good set just feels good. So there are a couple different techniques for operant conditioning, but I do want to kind of, you know, show you guys the difference between classical conditioning, which is just something that kind of you're exposed to and sort of happens, and operant conditioning, which is the sort of training aspect of it. So Simon, here you go. Let's see here. Pavlov should do it. I think this is trimmed down. Yeah, here we go.
A family vacation in a Verbo means leaving all the craziness behind. Well, maybe not all of it.
I have to reboot again. Hey, Dwight, do you want an Altoid? What do you think? Dwight, want an Altoid? Okay. Altoid? Sure. What are you doing? What?
I don't know. Well, my mouth tastes so bad all of a sudden.
So that is very much an example there of operant, or I'm sorry, classical conditioning, right? Because like to Dwight, he was experiencing this kind of naturally, right? Like every time Jim would turn off his computer, he'd like, he would hear that sound, and like and eventually he started expecting to get like an Altoid. For him, it was classical conditioning. Now, in the clip, Jim is the one like sort of choosing to do this. So that's actually more of an example of operant conditioning from Jim's perspective, but Dwight didn't know that he was part of this experiment. So for him, it was very much like classical conditioning, right? And that's sort of the difference between the two. Classical conditioning is just sort of like how you're going to experience things naturally going throughout the world. This is probably how our habits got the way they are. If we, you know, don't really understand, it's like, why do I do this way? You know, it's probably because you were just exposed to it and drew an association with it over time. And then we can use operant conditioning to sort of fix that or change that if we desire to. Does that make sense, guys? You see the difference between the two?
Yeah.
Awesome. By the way, I had all my Sochi coworkers over for Christmas. Let's see here. I'm gonna pull up a picture of our dog. I had the Sochi folks over, and it was really funny because like we have this dog, his name's Finn, and Finn is the most shameful looking dog you've ever seen. I'm hoping Seth has like a picture of him somewhere. There he is. This is also like the new puppy, but this dog right here just always has like a side eye, like look at this. His head's always at like an angle, and he's always looking like down and then like up ever so slightly, and he just looks guilty all the time. Not that one. You can even see like this is a picture that we got Seth for Christmas. It's the stepbrothers with his 2 dogs. But like Finn is just an incredibly shameful looking dog. Like it's like he always just got done like hiding a dead body, and he's just like, nobody notices, right? Like he's the friendliest dog in the world, like nicest dog, you know, ever. But like we always make fun of him, and then I never really even thought about it, but like Angel, who's in charge of the massage program, was like, I wonder where he learned that. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, like that is 100% like he learned at some point in his puppy life that if he like tilts his head down and looks kind of sad or looks a little shameful, that like people will give him like extra scratches behind the ears. And I was like, Yeah, that's 100% true. Because the minute you get like a ball or something, he'll like snap out of it. Like he won't look that way. He'll just like totally like snap to attention. So like that dog like continually manipulates me on a daily basis because I'll look at him and be like, oh my God, he looks so sad. And I'll go over and like start petting him and he'll just maintain this like kind of sad look. Meanwhile, I'm being 100% manipulated, like that dog is using like conditioning to get what he wants. um there are a couple different techniques for operant conditioning here, right? If we are trying to create a positive association or make like a change in some way, that is where operant conditioning comes in. And so we're going to learn these associations between like voluntary behaviors and their consequences. So the most natural sort of classic version of this is what we call positive reinforcement, right? In the video clip from The Office, Jim was, positively reinforcing Dwight by giving him an Altoid every time, right? So it's the addition of a positive consequence after the person produces a targeted behavior, right? So the client gets to have, like, a good example of this would be like having like a cheat meal after a week of successful eating, right? This is where like the cheat day thing kind of came from. It's like, hey, if you do really well all week, you get to have a cheat day, right? If you do really well all month, right? The Rock, he'll do like those epic, super intense cheat days, right? But he only does that if he has like successfully, hit all of his target goals and stuff, right? So now we start to draw an association between a targeted behavior, which is a behavior that we're choosing. It's like, I want to get better at doing this, right? And like whatever naturally occurring behavior is associated with that. Because if we get a reward for doing the targeted behavior, we start to, seek that behavior out more often, right? So the classic, the 10th cup of coffee free thing, right? You are being positively reinforced, right? Every time you go to that coffee shop, you get to punch your card. And when you get to 10, you get a positive reinforcement, which is a free cup of coffee. And so it naturally, sort of reinforces your habits of coming there much more often. Now, the exact opposite of positive reinforcement is punishment, right? Now, punishment is the addition of an aversive stimulus, a negative stimulus, following a behavior that we are trying to decrease, right? So, for instance, like, getting a speeding ticket is an example of punishment, right? Like you are doing an untargeted behavior. We are actively trying to get somebody to not, go above the speed limit. And so the way that we do that is we give them like an aversive stimulus. In this case, it's like a speeding ticket, right? In order to sort of get them to stop doing that untargeted behavior. So punishment is adding this negative stimulus when we're trying to decrease like a certain, activity. You get enough speeding tickets, you're eventually going to stop. For me, it was freaking parking tickets. So a client has to perform an extra 30 minutes of cardio if they didn't follow the nutrition plan, right? Like you can set this up with your clients and say, all right, so this week, well, I want you to take a look at your diet, use your food journal. If you really nail it this week, we're going to set, we're going to have like a cheat meal on Sunday. If not, we might have to do an extra 30 minutes of cardio, right? So now you are sort of setting it up to either have like a punishment or a positive reinforcement there. I am not personally a huge fan of punishment as like a technique. I don't really love it because like it starts to draw like negative associations. This is why like I don't like drawing negative associations with foods. I don't like to eliminate certain things from people's diets because that is kind of focusing on the negative aspect of things. But it would be unfair to say that it is not an effective technique. Punishment can absolutely work if you use it the right way. But we want to have a positive association. We want to have a positive relationship with exercise and with our clients. So me personally, I don't love punishment as like a technique. I do really like negative reinforcement though. And negative reinforcement sounds a lot like punishment, but they are not similar at all. Negative reinforcement, a lot of times like people hear that and they think, oh, that's punishment, right? I'm reinforcing by doing something negative to someone. That's actually not what this is. Negative reinforcement is removing a negative consequence in order to increase a targeted behavior, right? So negative reinforcement, the example used in the video is perfect, where he's talking about like, the beeping in your car is very annoying. You can take that annoying thing away. All you have to do is put your seatbelt on. And so eventually you start to draw an association with like, oh, I make my life easier, I make my life better, and I remove annoying stuff from my life when I do these targeted behaviors, right? So a trainer might take out like their client's like least favorite activity from a training program if they had like an excellent week of training. Like if they really killed it, it's like, you know what, this week, let's take out this thing that is often like, a finisher workout or something that's like a little bit tougher. That can be like an example of negative reinforcement. So like then they're like, oh man, like, well, I hate doing burpees, and as long as I like, do this thing that I'm supposed to, I don't have to do the burpees. I like negative reinforcement as like a tool, it's if you ever get like those text messages, you can opt out, right? Like you opt out, that's like you're getting rid of the annoying text, right? You're negatively reinforcing yourself. So positive reinforcement is adding something nice whenever somebody does a targeted behavior. Negative reinforcement is removing something annoying whenever they do a targeted behavior. So both of those things are associated directly with the targeted behavior. Punishment is much more associated with an untargeted behavior. So you do something we're trying to avoid, that's an untargeted behavior. So you get punished for it, right? There is also response cost, which is similar to negative reinforcement. And this is the removal of positive reinforcers to decrease the probability of the response that removing that follows, right? So for instance, like a trainer removes the reward that is sort of associated with an untargeted behavior, right? So if somebody does something, this is like taking something nice away, like in the same way that negative reinforcement was taking something annoying away in response to doing something good. Response cost is taking something nice away in response to doing something not so good. So for instance, like, if a kid is misbehaving and you take away their toy, that is a response cost. So then they go, oh, I guess when I'm acting like a little brat, I lose my favorite toy. Okay, I'm not going to do that anymore, right? So response cost and punishment are a little bit more similar to one another. I am not a huge fan of those as a technique. I much prefer positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement because those are associated with targeted behaviors. But if you are trying to like learn how to avoid targeted behaviors, if you are trying to learn how to avoid untargeted behaviors, things that you're trying to get rid of in your life, punishment and response cost can be really good techniques for those. Does that make sense, everybody? Do we see sort of those separate directions and then those separate techniques?
Yep.
Cool. Awesome possum. All right. So let's talk about the various different techniques. So there's contingency contracting, there's pre-macking, there's stimulus control, modeling, relaxation training. There's all kinds of different techniques you can use to apply this behavior therapy stuff. So when this works, one of the first ones you want to do is what's called contingency contracting. Contingency contracting is basically like laying a framework between you and the client and describing like, what's going to happen if. Right. So it's like, hey, if you do this targeted behavior, you're going to get this reward. If you do this untargeted behavior, you're going to get this punishment. Right. If I laid that out for my client in the beginning, that's an example of contingency contracting. So if I were training Julio, for instance, and here are my clients, and I'm working with him on like Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And at the same time, we're talking about like his diet and stuff. And I give him like a food journal, right? And it's like, all right, do me a favor. I want you to, track all the food you're eating, track your water intake. And if you get enough water, because maybe that's his thing, right? If you get enough water in 5 out of 7 days per week, or 5 out of 7 days this week, we'll go do an extra our cool down. Instead of like doing cardio, we'll go play like a little bit of like one-on-one basketball. We'll head up to the gym, we'll do that. That's a little bit more fun, right? But if we notice that like our water intake is like a little bit low, obviously we want to increase that water intake. So what we're going to do instead is, we're going to have extra burpees at the end of the workout or something like that. Like our cardio is going to be sort of a hard version, right? So if I laid that out with him like verbally, or if I write that down, that's an example of a contract, right? So there's lots of different types of contracts, right? But the way that you sort of take your client through this whole process and set your contract up, step one, you want to establish what your target behaviors are, right? So like between him and I, we're gonna have a conversation and we're gonna decide like what it is like I'm being hired for, what he's trying to improve, and like what he wants to do. And so I can help establish some target behaviors. Like I want you to do X, Y, and Z this week, right? Then what we're going to do is we're going to continually like monitor our progress. So we're going to monitor our clients like progress towards this goal, right? Now, when it comes to monitoring progress, it's very effective for us as the trainer to do that. One of the things that I would do is set up like text reminders or email reminders to my clients. I would use like an auto text dialer that would just send out like text messages 24 hours before like training sessions. And with certain like clients that were kind of problematic about like doing their homework and stuff, I would also set up texts on the days they were supposed to go to the gym that would go out and say, something like, hey, just a reminder, you're going to be in the gym in 1 hour, right? And then they would, send me like a thumbs up or something like that. That was like kind of annoying, eventually they got kind of tired of like receiving all these freaking text messages from me. And I was like, hey, if you go regularly and you stop missing your homework days, I will remove the text messages, right? That is an example of negative reinforcement. I am reinforcing this positive behavior of going, to the gym and doing their homework regularly. I'm reinforcing that by removing the annoying text messages that I will send my clients. Like one client, I set it up, I was like, he was never doing his homework. He was a young guy like me at the time. He was only like, I think he was like directly around my age at the time. And I was like, dude, you got to start doing your homework. He's like, I know, I love sleeping in. And I was like, all right. I was like, you've been getting texts from me. He's like, oh, I know I've been getting, and we both kind of bonded over the fact that we hate being like texted all the time. Like I hate it when my phone's just like blowing up. Like, and so I was like, all right, man, like if you don't make it to your homework this week, I'm going to set up a bunch of auto texts. And he was like, no. And sure enough, like I had him going out every 5 minutes. It was like 60 minutes before, 55 minutes before, 50 minutes before. And then like, it was like, stop. And I was like, you can make this go away. All you gotta do is go to the gym. That's sort of an example of like using negative reinforcement. So we do want to monitor our progress of our clients and just check the computer, see if our clients checking in, doing the things they're supposed to do, check their food journaling and see how it goes, or just like, verbally check in with your clients. I should note that as good as it is for a trainer to continually check their client's progress, it is even more effective when your client checks their own progress. So self-monitoring has been shown to be much more effective than just like trainer monitoring. Like we are much better at changing our habits when we are keeping track of our habits rather than some external source keeping track of our habits for us. So we like monitoring progress as the coach, but we should also encourage our client to monitor their own progress. Next thing you're going to do is deliver consequences, right? So delivering consequences is the job of the trainer, right? This is set up in the contract. So you as the trainer and they as the client have already discussed what's going to happen if they hit their targeted behaviors, or if they hit their targeted behaviors, we can remove annoying stuff, we can add positive stuff, something to reinforce that behavior, or we can increase like punishment, or we can take something positive away. It's like, hey, you really like this thing, I'm gonna take it away. That's a response cost, right? So like whatever it is, whatever you are either going to use those techniques. Again, guys, I encourage you to mainly focus on positive reinforcement. This is definitely the best way to like coach. But I know plenty of trainers who like absolutely are great at like the yelling and the screaming. They're like, they get people fired up through like the sort of drill instructor approach. If you want to do that, great. Like I think sometimes that can be really effective. But at the same time, like, if that's not your business model and you tried to do that and you're not very good at it, I think positive reinforcement is probably the most general effective tool that we've got. So your client does what they're supposed to and they get some type of reward. So then they start to draw that association. That's probably the technique that you're going to find to be the most effective. Now, lastly, we do want to maximize generalization. Now, you might be wondering what generalization is. Well, generalization is basically the maintenance of behavior over time, right? We are trying to make this a general part of our client's life. So we are trying to maximize how easily all of this stuff happens naturally, right? So the coach will encourage the client to adhere to the program and make it as natural as possible. Again, I kind of talked about this yesterday, right? Like making the decision to go to the gym is sometimes the worst, right? Getting up, the 5 minutes before this Zoom call starts, I'm sure everybody is like, oh, I gotta start the Zoom call, right? I don't judge you. I totally get it. Going to work is the worst part of having a job. That sounds weird, but what I mean is like, it's the 5 minutes before you have to leave that is the hardest, because that's where you have to like make this decision to leave. Once you're at work, like I love what I do, but there are definitely times where like, I'll be having a conversation with my girlfriend or my parents, or I'll be, doing something that I'm really enjoying. And I'm like, oh, I gotta go, that takes willpower to pull yourself away from this thing that you naturally want to do. So we want to get to a place where like this other stuff happens very naturally, which is why my roommates, like if you asked them what all of our schedules are, I would be willing to bet that most of my roommates are unaware of what time all of us go to work or what days off we all have, except me. All of my roommates know exactly when my classes are, Monday through Friday, because like I have made a point of like making it really clear to them when I am done with conversations and when I leave, because I know that myself, I will naturally get drawn towards the things that I want to do. And so I need to have things be a little bit more automatic for myself. That is just something that is me, sort of using behavior therapy in my own life, so I'm trying to maximize generalization by making things naturally occur. I have reward systems set up naturally. I have positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. I have these things that are going to happen naturally. Your car beeping at you to put your seatbelt on maximizes generalization because it's just something that happens every single time. You don't have to be like, okay, I want to reinforce my seatbelt wearing habit, so let me turn on that annoying alarm, right? And you're like, okay, now I can turn it off. Well, like you don't have to do that. It just happens naturally. That is maximizing generalization. So work with your client to figure out how to maximize and make these naturally occurring target behaviors, make those target behaviors happen as often as possible, right? What is it? Did everybody see the new Spider-Man movie? With the spider people? Yeah.
I didn't.
You haven't?
I haven't.
Okay, I don't want to give you any major spoilers, but there's this clip that I think is like in one of the trailers because I've seen it pop around the internet a lot. But it is funny when there's like a conversation with like one of the Spidey's he's like, how do you the webbing just comes out of your arm? And he's like, how does that happen? And he's like, I don't know how it happens. Like I don't do it, it just happens. Like I don't do breathing. Breathing just happens naturally. That is maximized generalization. Like that's where we're trying to get our clients positive habits to come from a place of, right? We are trying to get them to naturally occur as much as possible. So again, we're going to start by establishing target behaviors with the client. So we're going to work together to, just determine what, honestly, this is like asking your client, like, what do you want to work on? What do you want to get better at? Right. Or maybe we're like, hey, you should do this. Right. We can suggest some target behaviors. And then we're going to monitor their progress, right? We're going to keep track of it. Like you can check the gym to see if your client's checking in. You guys know that I've some of you I've had conversations with. If you are unaware of this, it means that you check in regularly and come to class regularly. But for those of you who have had this conversation with me, you know that like I check Canvas and I'm like, hey, like I can't help but notice that you haven't logged on to Canvas in like 3 weeks, you know? That's like one of the things. And you know, a lot of you guys are great about getting your homework done, maybe sometimes not so much for others, right? That's the sort of like coaching process, right? Monitoring progress. I know some of you are like listening to this call like, "Ooh," you know, and others are like, I don't even know what he's talking about. Yeah, that's the monitoring progress, right? So we do know, again, self-monitoring is the most effective way to do this. Obviously trainers should be monitoring things. We are the coach. We are there to guide our clients for sure. But if they have a lot more like self-monitoring, it's not only going to help them like see when they are progressing or when they are not progressing, it is also going to help them become more aware. And awareness is also something we are trying to develop in our clients. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna deliver consequences, right? So you can see here is some of the rules for in general for behavioral like contracting in terms of like delivering those consequences, right? So one of the things you should always do, reward your clients immediately. This is one of the reasons like we're trying to potty train a very small dog at our house right now because we got a new puppy. That dog, anytime he goes to the bathroom outside, we keep treats on the table outside because like it's the fastest way to get him. So we want to reward him as quick as possible. We do reward small steps towards that desired behavior as well. You know, if your client is supposed to go to the gym 5 days in a week, but they only make it 3 days a week, that's still better than what they were doing before, which is maybe only once a week, right? So you can reward small steps along the way and increase that reward, or you know, depending on the behaviors. This dog often pees on the porch rather than actually on the grass. And like we still reward the dog for peeing outside because that's what we're trying to draw an association with. I don't love that he's peeing on the porch, but like it's better than peeing in the house. So he is still getting like some type of like positive reinforcement there. Use those rewards really frequently. And you should always be rewarding accomplishments over obedience. Like reward your client whenever they are you know, doing the targeted behaviors, you know, rather naturally, rather than just doing it because you said so. You know, this is where like people sort of don't understand the difference between like respect and authority. Like there should be a mutual respect between a client and a coach, but there shouldn't be like an authority between like the coach and the client. You know, like it's your client is listening to you because you're an expert and they respect your opinion. They're not listening to you because you're an authority figure. If you are like working, if that's sort of the dynamic that you have, it's just a lot weaker than like it's a lot weaker than a relationship built on like mutual respect. I definitely remember like being in high school or being in college and like having like some teachers who I like really respected, and I was like, you do a great job. And I would do my homework on time in those classes because like, you know, I respected that teacher. Other classes I would do it because my teacher, I didn't like them, and I would do it because like I, you know, just wanted to get them off my back. That was a much weaker response, and I often like would just not do it, you know. That's not the relationship you want to have with your client, you know. I know that there's like the fun, there's sort of the fun client trainer relationship of like where the client's like, oh, you're a sadist, you know, and it's like, come on, we gotta go, and they're like, oh, you're the worst, you know. There's like the fun version of that, and then there's the version of that that kind of becomes a little real, and that's usually when that relationship with the coach and the client ends. You know, if they really truly don't enjoy your sessions, you know, there's kind of a difference between, you know, talking about how freaking hard a boot camp instructor is. You know, I had a reputation of being one of the tougher instructors when I was at Biggest Loser. but like people liked that, they were like, oh, Brett's classes are freaking hard, like but at the same time, like, even though that's like a negative thing, it was like a fun thing, because people do also really like a challenge. So that you do want to make sure that you're building all of these reinforcement styles, guys, from a place of like mutual respect with the client. And you don't want to get to this place where like they see you as sort of an authority figure that they don't, they're not doing things because they respect you. They're doing things because they're just trying to get you off their back. That's not the relationship we want to have. Because at the end of the day, they can just be like, oh yeah, that's right, I can just stop paying this person. Like, that's not great for anybody, right? They're not going to reach their goals. You're not going to pay your rent. Like, both of those suck. And then we're going to try to maximize generalization as possible. Again, we are going to try to make their living environment support them in these behaviors, right? To make it as easy and effort-free as possible, right? So again, like me, I want to like be able to get out the door and start my day efficiently and effectively without having to like use too much brain power. That's one of the reasons why I pretty much just buy, black, white, and gray t-shirts, and then, keep them in my closet. They're all exactly the same. I don't have to think about like what to wear, I only have like two, and I guess that's not true. I have a couple like team jerseys that I've had over the years, from like different tournaments and stuff. But generally, I only use these two jerseys that I have to play Frisbee in. One light, one dark, and I just bring them both every time I go to play. I don't have to decide, is this light enough? This is kind of a gray. I don't have to do that. I just keep it really simple. So maximizing generalization is sort of setting up your life in such a way that these habits that you're trying to create will occur naturally. So those are that's sort of a flow chart. That's sort of the 4 steps that you can kind of take your clients through this. Any questions on that, fellas? Questions, comments? Doing good?
No, I don't have any questions.
Love it. All right. So one of the best ways to maximize generalization is an example of what is called pre-macking, which is the coolest name because it's just named after this guy, David Premack. And so you're pre-macking. You're doing what this guy says. And basically, he looked at behavior therapy and was like, the easiest way to do this would just be to make it happen as naturally as possible in life. So he kind of took this whole heavy science and boiled it down to, why don't you pair a targeted behavior with something that you're going to do naturally, right? If you want operant conditioning, why don't you rely on classical conditioning, right? If this stuff's going to happen naturally, just do this stuff first so this never even occurs, right? That's sort of the pre-macking approach. So, for example, a trainer would instruct their client to put their running shoes by the door. And that will naturally tempt them to get out and go for a walk. Again, earlier I talked about how I would put my toothbrush on top of my phone. I'm going to turn my phone off. It's loud and annoying, but if my toothbrush is there, I'm just going to immediately start my morning routine. And that's always what I do first. I brush my teeth, I go make my coffee, I work out, I come home, I shower, or I'll shower at the gym, and then I head to work, at least in the version of the world, I'm kind of blending like my pre-pandemic life and like my post-pandemic life. Now it works a little bit differently, now my roommate sort of stole my workout time and I train him before class instead. But I still, pair this targeted behavior with an untargeted one. I do naturally go downstairs and make myself like a morning cup of coffee, and I drink it during like my session with my roommate. I'm pairing a targeted behavior. I'm going to want my morning coffee with maybe an untargeted behavior that I want to reinforce. That's sort of what we're seeing here, right? Another way that you can do this is what's known as like stimulus control. Stimulus control is basically creating situations where, an untargeted behavior is either unfavorable or undesired. So for instance, like let's say you've got a client who continually eats like junk food. I had a client who liked ice cream. That was their big thing. They loved ice cream. And I was like, hey, you know what? Like, you don't have to get rid of ice cream in your life. But when it becomes unconscious and just like classical conditioning, where it's just something that happens, you have a hard day and you just naturally seek it out, that is problematic because like you're probably pretty unaware of how much of it is like coming in, and so that's making it very hard to track your calories. That's making it really hard for you to create like an energy deficit if you're trying to lose weight. So we use stimulus control to kind of help with this, right? So what we did is we were just like, well, just don't buy ice cream at the store. If you want it, you have to walk to Baskin Robbins, which is, luckily for this client, this was the perfect sort of thing that actually worked for them. There was not a Baskin Robbins. It was they lived down the street from Salt and Straw. And so it was like, which is also like a little bit more expensive, which is kind of nice for stimulus control. And I was like, look, if you had a really hard day and you really want to like, have this thing, like you can still have like that in your life. You're not cutting anything out of your life, but keeping it in your house is what's challenging. Instead, why don't you walk, not buy it at the store anymore, and you walk whenever you need. That'll give you time to think more about it, like if you actually want to do this, and then you can weigh the pros and cons. You're like, the pro is like, obviously, like I want ice cream, right? But the con is like, oh, I gotta put my shoes on, I gotta walk out the door. Do I want ice cream more than I want to stay in my house? And if you ask yourself that, sorry, that's probably really loud. Good Lord. If you ask yourself that, nope, it's just, is this person directly below me? Well, okay, it's going away. Jesus. If you have time to just kind of ask yourself that question, you're like, I'm not sure that I want ice cream, but I'm not sure that I want it more than, putting this effort in, then chances are you don't really necessarily want it. So that's kind of an example of stimulus control, right? We either make it sort of unfavorable or undesirable to sort of get it, right? Stimulus control, an example of that paired with like punishment is also like sort of in the dog realm of things. If dogs will go through like a teething process where they like start chewing up furniture and shoes and things like that. So one of the things that you can do to stimulus control that is spray this like really nasty spray that just doesn't taste very good on like your furniture legs and stuff, and then your dog starts to go, well, I do like chewing on stuff, but I like it less than that awful flavor, so then they kind of decide not to do that anymore. So there's environmental stimulus control, reducing the availability of something in a particular environment, right? Like a smoker not going to a bar because people might be smoking there. I guess it's not really a thing anymore, but or stimulus narrowing, which is strengthening the association between like a behavior and a specific setting, right? So then like, again, ice cream, you think about it, it's like, oh, well, I have to go, ice cream is not something I have in my house. It's something I have when I go to an ice cream shop, that's me. I used to have like a real problem with like soda. I really used to drink a lot of soda. Coca-Cola and Mountain Dew Live Wire. Those were my two big things when I was growing up and when I was in college and stuff. But now I sort of draw the association a little bit differently. Coca-Cola is something that I enjoy when I am at the movies. And so I go to the movies and yeah, I have like a Coke, I have my popcorn, right? Like those two things together are my favorite thing. Or like pizza is another one. Like if I have like, and not like pizza at home, but like greasy, if I'm at like a street pizza place, that's where I'll often get like a Coca-Cola. But when I was a kid and when I was growing up, like, man, it was just always around. And so like that is definitely something that I was heavily addicted to at one point in my life. And so when I wanted to get all that sugar intake out of my life, I instead decided like, oh, these are the times, these are the places where I'm going to do that, I don't generally drink at home all that often, but I'll have like a drink when I go out, for dinner or something, that's a way that like I try to keep things, in a controlled place. Now, one of the other things that you should be doing as the coach is also the idea of like modeling, and we use modeling all the freaking time in training sessions. Obviously, it's one of the best ways to teach your client how to do like a particular exercise, right? So modeling is the process of demonstrating an action in order to help others duplicate it. Practice what you preach, basically. If you are continually like, taking your client through the same steps that you are going through when it comes to like, engaging in like a healthy lifestyle, they're much more likely to listen to you when it comes to that healthy lifestyle, right? My roommate that I trained was talking about like wanting to read like this particular book, but he was having a really hard time like finding the time to read and finding the motivation to read it. And I was like, oh man, it's great. It's this book, Atomic Habits, which is a habit book that I also really like. I think it's a little less instructional. I think The Power of Habits better. Like he was excited to read Atomic Habits, and I was like, you should do it. I love that book. And he was like, yeah, I know. He's like, I just can't find the time. And so I was like, tell you what, on Fridays, we'll have like a fake book club during our session. We always have a training session on Fridays. And so I was like, every Friday, the conversations that we have during our training session will be built around like this book that we're both reading. And that was like a really approachable thing. He was like, that's awesome. So now he'll like we'll both like read a chapter at some point during the week, and then we recap it when we meet on Fridays. And then our other training sessions are just kind of normal, but that's also something that I've done with my other clients. I've done that with The Power of Habit like a couple times now, which is why I've read that book like I've read that book 4 times, because I keep going through it with clients. At this point, I think I'm just going to sort of summarize the chapters. If I ever decide to do that again, I don't need to read that book anymore. But book clubs are a really fun thing to sort of implement into your training sessions. Clients love that stuff, and you get to read like fun, books on, habits and stuff. It's good for you. It's good for them. That's something that I have always really enjoyed, and absolutely stole from a coworker of mine named Kareen. I stole that from her. So let's go ahead. So that's kind of the end of our notes, right? We do know that modeling is a really good way to kind of help, we're going to demonstrate something, and then our clients are going to learn how to kind of recreate that, right? So let's sort of take a walk through like the modeling process and the behavior change process, right? So if we're talking about behaviorally coaching our client, right? We're going to start by like carefully defining our desired behaviors. An example of this is very much contingency contracting, right? We define what it is. It's like, here's what we're trying to do. Here's what we're trying to avoid. This is how we're going to do that, right? So we elaborate and detail the descriptions of what our desired behaviors are, and then maybe what the consequences are of those desired behaviors, whether it's a positive reinforcement, a negative reinforcement, we take something annoying away, maybe punishment or response cost if you want to use those. I'm not a huge fan, but you can. Then we're going to instruct our clients to like execute the play, right? So if you were like literally coaching somebody on the field, right, you're going to say, all right, I want you to run here, and then you're going to run this route afterwards, and then as that happens, over your right shoulder the ball is going to come, and you're going to turn, you're going to catch it, right? So then they're going to execute it, right? They're going to do the specific task. Now we as the coach are going to judge that execution, right? Did they run with good form? Did they get there quickly? Did they have like a hard stop and a hard turn? And did they catch the ball like over the right shoulder? If they didn't do any of those things properly, we're going to describe the incorrect execution. It's like, hey, that was really good, but you need to plant your feet a little bit harder, right? Give them a little bit of feedback on what to improve. And then we're going to show them that. We're going to model that execution. Say, I want you to plant your feet like this, right? Drive really hard to the ground and then spin, right? Like that's modeling the correct execution. And then we're going to have our client go through that again so that they can draw that association. If they do it right, they come back, we give them a high five, right? Whatever that motivates them. Hey, really great job. That draws that positive, that positive reinforcement, right? So that is one of the ways that we're going to sort of like help our clients, like, literally on the field if that's the type of coach that you're going to be. But the same thing is true like during exercise, right? You know, we're going to tell them, it's like, so I want you to keep your core tight while you're doing this, you know, elbows in like a neutral position, and you're going to press, and I want you to keep your shoulders down instead of like hiking the shoulders up, and then like have them do that. We're going to judge it and say, hey, that looks really good, but you were arching your low back just a little bit. I want you to squeeze your core a little bit to get that neutral spine for me. So we describe the incorrect thing that they did. We describe the correct things they did. It's like, your shoulders look great. We just had a little bit of that low back arch. We model it and show them what we mean. Like, this was good, but the arch was bad, right? And then we have them imitate that. So it's like on the next set, you know, maybe giving them like a little bit of a visual cue, touch the low back or touch the stomach, and then that gets them to tighten up their core and then gets into a neutral spine. And then they start to draw that association. When they're done with their set, it's like, hey, great work. That looked awesome. Positive reinforcement, you know, with like a compliment or a high five or something. And that kind of gets them into the right frame of mind. And now they're going to know how to do that movement. They're going to get better and better and better at it. Now, there's a couple fringe things that are associated with behavior therapy. One of those things is like assertiveness training. This is not really something we are going to do a lot of, but assertiveness training is like, you know, involves like a little bit of role playing, learning how to like become, like learning how to say no to people. I often used to call this, I would say like challenge the food police. Every now and then when a client is on like a diet, you know, they'll share that they're on a diet with like their friends or their family, and their friends or family think that they're helping by being like, oh, should you be eating that? You know, but a lot of times like they have no idea like what you know, you had for lunch. Maybe you had this planned cheat meal in. So it can like kind of lead to some negative emotions. Those negative emotions can lead to either digging your heels in or doubling down, and then like, you know, engaging in some type of unhealthy behavior. So I would always encourage my clients to learn how to like say, nope, this was all part of my plan. You know, I am still allowed to have this. This fits very well. And yeah, no, I'm doing great. Right. And so like that's challenging. But sometimes people are just like, you know, they hear from a friend or a family, and then it makes them feel kind of guilty or feel kind of bad. And they kind of shrink into themselves, and then, you know, sort of abandon things. And then that ends up leading to overeating later. So assertiveness training can be very helpful. And so, you know, encouraging your clients to learn how to like challenge that kind of thing sometimes needs to happen. Not everybody is naturally very assertive. So teaching your clients to learn how to maintain eye contact, posture up and stay upright rather than shrinking down, making certain gestures, using like a strong tone without, you know, screaming at someone. The timing of it is big. Make sure your client like learns how to like say this like right away, and then the content should always be directly related to whatever it is they are talking about directly, right? You're not going to do too much assertiveness training. It doesn't come up that often, but it is like you might need this for yourself, because sometimes like I know some trainers are maybe sometimes nervous about coaching their clients, like bossing their clients around. Remember, guys, you're not bossing anybody around. This is a relationship built on mutual respect. You are an expert. And so like, because you are the expert, you're the one that's encouraging your client. You are helping them. Again, this is a sales thing sometimes, right? Assertiveness training, you know, if you are assertive, you're going to be a good salesperson. So you don't get to train anybody if they don't have any sessions. They don't get to have sessions if you don't sell them the training. So don't think of it as like, oh, I have to do these sales, you know, and I'm charging this person all this money. That's not the perspective you want to have. The perspective you want to have is like, you know, if this person buys this package, I get to help them. I get to have like a really positive impact on their life. That's what we're looking for. So how do we do all this? How do we apply freaking behavior therapy to our clients in the most effective way possible? Well, it depends on what stage of change your client is in. Certain aspects of behavior therapy are going to work better depending on what stage of change your client is in. You got a client in the pre-contemplation stage, you know, honestly, one of the best things you can do is really just like pre-mac them a little bit, right? Choose a healthy website and make it their homepage. They're going to get on the internet. if you make a healthy website, they're going to probably see some type of article or something, right? I know like with Google, I get like whenever I open up like a new tab, I can see like articles related to things that I already search a lot kind of pop up. The cookies in my phone are naturally pre-macking for me, but you can assist your client in doing this, right? You can throw some cookies in there, right? Or you can do like articles everywhere, right? Stimulus control. So the reason those two things are working is because both of them are sort of built around the idea of educating someone. And education is the best way to move someone from pre-contemplation into contemplation. Now, if you're trying to move somebody out of this, this is where maybe you can create like a contingency contract built around giving your client like a little bit of homework for them to see themselves where they would be in the future if they make like these adjustments, right? So like, it's like, hey, I want you to do a little bit of research and tell me what your life would look like if you did X, Y, and Z, right? Or maybe you do a little bit of like pre-macking here as well, right? If this client really likes getting like massages, tell them, hey, great, we have massages in the gym here. This is the only place you can get a massage from now on, right? So it's like, well, they're going to do that naturally. If they come to the gym in order to do it, they're already in the area, right? They've sort of like used a little bit of stimulus control there. If you got a client who's in the preparation stage, right now, suddenly they've been coming to the gym a little bit, maybe they're preparing for like a big change, maybe they're preparing to come like regularly. We're going to focus on maybe setting up like specific target behaviors or setting up like an advanced workout program. It's like, this is the program you're going to go through, right? That can be a really effective tool for somebody who's in the preparation. If you give somebody like a workout program who's in pre-contemplation, they wouldn't even glance at it because they're not really ready to make a change. But if they're in the preparation stage, they've already started thinking about it, right? They've maybe even come to the gym a couple times here and there, just not very regularly. So show them what it would be like, make them aware of the pros and cons of this, and then get them a routine. And then that way they can start getting on that routine. If they're in the action stage, they've actually done this a little bit, and we're trying to turn this into maintenance. This is where you can actually get your client to focus on like some new goals that sort of rely on the old ones, right? So again, implementing a contingency contract for nutrition goals in addition to fitness goals, that can be really effective. Or you can take like a new activity that they like and pair it up with something that is maybe something that you're trying to target. So, before they used to do like X, well, now you're going to get them to do X and Z. You're going to get them to do both things, right? That is sort of an example of like what works really well with an action level client, because we are trying to sort of push them forward. So it's like, oh, I've only barely mastered this skill. And it's like, well, you have mastered it though. So let's pair it up with this new thing that we're also trying to work on. Shouldn't be too overwhelming, but it should like sort of piggyback on it, right? They're working towards their long-term goal by knocking out small short-term goals along the way. And then if you got a client in a maintenance phase, one of the best things you can do is actually make them a leader. Get them involved in like a group exercise class where like you use them as the demo. That's a great way to get somebody to like stick to the program, right? So like, let's say like I invited all of you guys to a group exercise class, and Simon is in the maintenance stage, right? I'd be like, all right, so we're gonna do some front squats here. Simon's gonna be my demo. Come on over. I'll have him like demo. It's a really great way because then like they are clearly feel like they're the expert. They're kind of a leader in class. People can kind of pay attention to them. That's a really great way to kind of keep people on the road, because then it's like, oh, now they have a little bit of extra pressure where they're like, other people are relying on me. I can't fall off the wagon. This is where like in Alcoholics Anonymous, for instance, someone will actually become a sponsor eventually, right? And that's a really great way to kind of keep them, it's a mutually beneficial relationship where one person's benefiting from the expertise of another, but the person who's the expert is also benefiting by having someone that relies on them. And that is behavior therapy, guys. One of my favorite lessons. I think it's a really great way. If you've got some habits in your life that you're trying to change, I think this is a really fun way to do that. But while I've got you, any questions, comments, or concerns? How we all feeling?
Good.
Cool.
I'm at the park using the exercise machines.
Hey, I love that. Those are great.
Yeah, I know.
Cool deal. That's really good. I mean, work out while you're listening to me. You're getting both barrels. Cyrus, you have a question? How you feeling?
Good, sir. No question.
Hey, love that. All right, fellas, I'll end the recording here.